Welcome back, everybody. Hope everyone is doing well. My name is Jason. I'll be your host on this CFL talk show, Huskies Huddle. In this video, we are going to look at quarterbacks in the CFL. Just in general, look back at my preseason rankings that look pretty bad in retrospective. We'll talk about all that, where I think if I was to redo this list midway through this season, where these players would rank. So without further ado, that is what we're going to be talking about in today's video. So these are most of the major quarterbacks that have seen significant time over the past couple of years here. And I'm sorry if I missed any of them, but I just can't talk about everybody. I couldn't fit everybody on the whiteboard here. So, hopefully the quality for this video is good enough to read the whiteboard, at least for the most part. I'll point out when it's not, these ones right here are going to be a little bit harder to read. But I'm going to start from the top and then just walk through every quarterback here and how I think they played this year and where they would rank if I was to do this list again right now midway through the 2022 CFL season. So obviously at number one going into the year, I had Claris, the reigning MOP for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, and I really don't think he's done much to negate that fact and remove him from the number one spot. I think he is an easy bet to stay at number one. He is still very healthy. Despite having those issues earlier in his career, he has been very well protected by a good offensive line there. It's just been an outstanding fit for Claris, but he has really shined this year, I think, in terms of the improvisational ability, the ability to extend plays, look down the field, keep his eyes downfield. Not necessarily a great runner. He can do that, but the fact that he can take passes down the field when extending those plays makes him such a lethal threat at quarterback in the CFL. And we're starting to see how he looked back in 2015 with Hamilton, basically. So, great stuff from Claris, and I would still have him at number one today. So that's the easy part of the video. But once you get beyond number one, it starts to get a little bit tricky. And we'll get to who I would have at number two later on in this video. But at number two in the preseason, I had Bo Levi Mitchell of the Calgary Stampeders. And to me, this is where I have these little dotted lines here. These are kind of the tiers I saw them in before the season. I thought Mitchell, Claris, the two most established guys. I thought I was going to give Mitchell the benefit of the doubt. He had a rough 2021 season. I thought he was going to be healthier coming into this season, and I thought he would play better than what he has shown this year, and ultimately leading to his benching in Calgary this past week. So, disappointing for Mitchell. And obviously, if I was to do this list again, he would not be at this number two spot. I think lately it's just been cratering down to earth back to his 2021 levels. And it's very disappointing to see after a promising start to the season for him. And then moving on to these next tier of guys here, these next six players going into the season, I couldn't make heads or tails of where to rank them. So I basically went, who do I think I feel most confident in from, passing perspective week to week, consistency and, combination of that and high upside. And, obviously, the sample size that we've seen so far in the CFL also plays a major factor here. But I had Dane Evans of the Hamilton Tiger Cats going into the season as my third-ranked quarterback in the CFL. And if you go back to my roster reviews, this is the one thing where I, because Montreal had two solid quarterbacks, I had them ranked third and Hamilton ranked fourth for quarterback. But I do think that going into the year, I had Dane Evans over guys like Vernon and Jeremiah Masoli, who we'll talk about more in a minute. But Dane Evans, you could talk about this guy. He is changed more than I think any of these players on this list this year. He is going to, probably crater down to, the 10th, 9th spot with how he's played this year. Obviously coming off a really bad game just this past weekend here against Toronto. And it's a tough season to see for Dane Evans. I'm a Tiger Cats fan myself, but it's been a rough year to watch. And he's honestly earned his benching right now for the Tiger Cats because he cannot take care of the football. And he just hasn't made enough plays like we've seen him do the past couple of years for Hamilton. Now, speaking of tough players to place, I had Vernon of the Munch Alouettes as my fourth-ranked quarterback in the preseason. And I just loved his upside I saw back in 2019. He really put the team on his back for a good stretch of games, and they were just the most exciting team to watch in the CFL, and I really bought into that. But at the same time, I understand why Montreal has gone a different way here at quarterback, because we'll talk about Trevor Harris more in a second, but Vernon Adams, I think they just got sick of the low completion percentage kind of quarterback. He made a lot of big plays. He made a lot of exciting plays, but I think they were just sick of the lack of consistency in that regard as a passer. So I think that's what led to his benching in Montreal very early in this season. He really shouldn't have been benched that early. I really don't believe, because it was only like a quarter and a half or a game and a half into the season. And honestly, I just don't think he earned, I think he earned more of a benefit of the doubt there in Montreal. But at the same time, yes, I do understand why they were sick of the issues that were persisting with Vernon Adams' game, even though he was just coming off the injury this past season in 2021. So, disappointing to see. I picked him as my MOP going into the year. I thought he was going to have a spectacular season, but it just fell apart really early in the season for him, and then he got injured when he was a backup here, came in for I think like a 3rd and 1 play or something like that, got injured, but, disappointing season for Vernon Adams all around. I do think he'll be a starting quarterback somewhere in the CFL next season, but it probably won't be in Montreal. So just a quick recap of so far in this video. These 3 guys here would all be moving down on a list if I was to do one today. And we're going to move on to a number 5 guy here that I think would stay exactly where I had him in the preseason in Jeremiah Masoli. And unfortunately, Jeremiah Masoli suffered what probably is a season-ending injury earlier in the season against the Saskatchewan Roughriders. And, before then, I just didn't see, the crazy upside I see with other quarterbacks, but at the same time, Masoli was pretty consistent in moving the ball. He's just a really solid quarterback at the CFL level, but I don't think he's anything more than, the 5th best starter in the league at this point in his career. He just hasn't shown the consistency to do it on a regular basis, doesn't score enough touchdowns. He only had 2 touchdown passes in his 4 games with Ottawa this season, so disappointing to see that from that regard, but he was playing relatively well with a pretty bad supporting cast there in Ottawa, even though they did improve this offseason. So, Masoli, disappointing to see that his season may have ended early this year, but I think going forward, he's still a solid quarterback in the CFL and one that Ottawa should be comfortable with going into next year if he decides to come back. And that's the question with Masoli as well. He may retire because of the injury that he suffered, because Masoli is actually pretty old. He's 35 years old right now, and I think, maybe because he suffered multiple knee injuries in his career, he may be thinking about it, but we'll see what happens with his career going forward. Now moving on to number 6 and another hard player to place here in Cody Fajardo of the Saskatchewan Roughriders. And Cody Fajardo really took the league by storm in 2019. He was a backup for several years, and then all of a sudden he was the starting quarterback for the Saskatchewan Roughriders. Had a really good season in 2019 and was the West nominee for most outstanding player. But ever since then, it just seems like it's been milding, kind of results so far from Cody Fajardo. I think what concerns me is his lack of progression as a passer. I think he just doesn't have the consistency. He can have really good games. Like last night, I watched him play against BC. He played relatively well. And then I think there's other games that he's just looked awful this season. Obviously, dealing with an injury in his knee. I don't even imagine what that must feel like for him. But at the same time, I don't know what he is going to look like going forward and how much of a leash he really has in Saskatchewan. He's already been benched once, so we'll see what he does the rest of the season. They have a tough schedule coming up. It'll be interesting to see what happens with him, but he's really one of the hardest guys to place in the entire CFL if I was to do a rankings video today. Now moving on to a player that I said in a recent video that I think is having a little bit of a bounce back season this year in Trevor Harris of the Montreal Alouettes. So I had 7th in the CFL in my preseason rankings. And I think Trevor Harris, he just is what he is at this point in the CFL. He's just kind of like a low upside quarterback, but at the same time, he can have great games. he's not going to do a whole lot of special to you. He's not going to extend plays like crazy. He has done that a little bit more this year in Montreal. It's clear that he worked on his fitness in the offseason because he's eluding sacks that he definitely wasn't last year. But I think Trevor's looked pretty good this year in Montreal. He's third in the league, I believe, in yards per attempt as of last week. I haven't checked the updated numbers because there's one more game to go this week as of the recording of this video. But, Trevor Harris, I think, has played relatively well. He's just a good East Division quarterback because, he goes out west to Edmonton, really struggles, but previously in Ottawa, he was a pretty good quarterback, nothing spectacular, and I know Ottawa fans got sick of him at the end of the day because he couldn't win the big one, but at the same time, he was a solid quarterback that can win a lot of games for you in the East Division in the CFL. So if I was actually going to do this list today, I would probably have Trevor Harris a little bit higher, maybe 6th on the list, maybe as high as 4th if he's playing well, but at the same time, you can't count on that on a week-to-week basis. So I'm interested to see what he does the rest of the season with Montreal, but ultimately, I think he's doing pretty well so far since he's taken over the job. Now moving on to the last guy I have in this tier of quarterbacks in Mcleod Bethel Thompson of the Toronto Argonauts. And I think this player is the most frustrating quarterback in the league to figure out because I know you look at the stats, usually, pretty solid. He doesn't really do a whole lot to, hurt your team, at least, the majority of the time. But at the same time, he has been prone in the past of his career going into this season that he had some really terrible games in terms of high turnover numbers, just a lot of errant throws. He had problems throwing the ball down the field last year. But this season, I think there's no player in this list that has improved his ranking. Actually, I'll scratch that. There is a player that has improved his ranking on this list much higher, but I think he's really improved his ranking on this list if I was to do it today. I would have him, I think, as the 4th best quarterback in the CFL right now. Midway through this season, granted, we're recording here in week 12, but I think Mcleod Bethel Thompson has done a pretty solid job in the climate of the CFL right now because there's not a whole lot of great quarterbacks played besides the top 2 guys in the league this year. And I think Mcleod Bethel Thompson has done enough to be the 4th guy in the league so far this season. He just hasn't had those terrible games that we've seen from a lot of other guys. And, I like what I've seen, generally speaking, from him this year. And he has all the physical talent to succeed. I'm just hoping he doesn't backslide in the second half of the season like he did last season. And it'll be interesting to see what happens with him the rest of 2022. So that is the end of that tier that I considered, the milding starters in the league that have shown a good sample size. And now we get into 2 guys that I had going into the year. They were promising backup types that got into some action last year but didn't get a ton of action in Jake Maier and Nathan Rourke. And obviously, I think that if you're to do this list today, these are probably 2 of the biggest movers. I would have Nathan Rourke at, I would have him number 2. You could argue him number 1 over Zach Claris, but I really don't think Clarus has done too much to lose that title. Obviously, Nathan Rourke has done so much for that BC organization. He's been lights out statistically as well, but, I think Nathan Rourke definitely has earned his way up this list, even with the potential season-ending injury, I should say, to his foot. But I don't know what's going to happen with Jake Maier, who, takes over the job here in Calgary, plays really well this week here against Winnipeg. Every time he's been in a CFL game, he has really played well, and it's been very, very consistent. He looks so poised, and I think that if you want to make a huge bold prediction, and I'll make it, I'll say he's probably my 3rd-ranked quarterback right now in the CFL behind Rourke and Claris. I just think he's shown a lot of promise every time he's been on the field. He has very consistent accuracy, and he just never looks panicked out there. And I think he just looks like the complete package. Looks like Calgary's done it again, found another great quarterback. Swear they've never had a bad quarterback in my lifetime. And, I think, with those 2 guys, there are very promising players going forward for the league in terms of their future. Maybe Nathan Rourke goes to the NFL. Maybe Jake Maier goes somewhere else as well if he, continues to play the way he is. But it's going to be very interesting to see going forward for the CFL in terms of, being kind of these franchise quarterbacks that Mitchell and Claris were to this era. And then lastly, I'm just going to quickly run through these other guys that are notable in the league, and some of these guys have just emerged this year. I just didn't think there was enough of a sample size with a lot of these players to rank them, or I just didn't want to do a list beyond the top 10 here. But starting with Caleb Evans, of the Ottawa Red Blacks, he's shown some flashes in a couple of games, but on the whole, he hasn't really shown any type of consistency, especially in terms of throwing the ball. His best asset for sure is his legs. Nick Arbuckle, now his partner in that tandem in Ottawa. He's been around. He's been passed around by a lot of coaching staffs. I don't know what there is for him going forward in this league. I think he's just a solid backup, and that's really what he should be. Solid when, called upon, but I really don't think he's anybody's starter. Matthew Schiltz, who may actually become the Tiger Cat starter going forward with how Dane Evans has played. I would probably have him. He might be top 10, actually, I don't have a list in front of me, but I think he probably would find his way into the top 10 with how he's played these past couple of games. Mason Fine of the Saskatchewan Roughriders just didn't have enough of a sample size last year, but has been kind of solid when he's been called upon. We saw him a little bit this past week, but I didn't feel confident enough to rank him prior to the season. Then Michael O'Connor, he's been around the league for a couple years, a Canadian quarterback, got picked up this offseason to be the BC Lions backup, and now he got a chance to start this week. Unfortunately, left the game early due to an injury, but it's going to be interesting to see if he gets healthy and can play the rest of the season and give us more of a sample size to make me feel more confident where he fits in at the CFL level. And then you got Chad Kelly of the Toronto Argonauts, that a lot of Argonauts fans who are, haters of Mcleod, Bethel, Thompson, they don't believe in him going forward. They want to see Chad Kelly on the field, but again, we have not really seen much of a sample size from him. Promising player to keep your eye on. And then the last two guys here in Edmonton, Taylor Cornelius, played a lot last year, actually, and I think this is another one that it's just a matter of, because these are in no particular order. I just didn't want to go beyond the top 10 of this list, running out of space here on the whiteboard. But Cornelius looked better, a little bit better this year, but looked pretty bad last year, all things considered, for Edmonton. I really thought Caleb Evans, for example, was more promising than Taylor Cornelius last year. I think the turnovers were just too much. He's cut down on those this year, which is a great sign, but still some inconsistencies there as a passer. And then you have Trey Ford, who's a rookie for Edmonton. Got into a couple starts, looked electric running the football. Some work to do passing the football by the small sample size he's shown, but it's going to be interesting to see what he does the rest of his career and how he fits into that situation in Edmonton. So in summary of this list, I would have Clarus staying the same at number 1, Mitchell going down, Dane Evans going down, Vernon Adams going down, Masoli staying pretty much exactly where he is. Fajardo maybe flipping a spot 6 or 7, but overall he's shown a little bit of talent still this year and ability to win some games. Trevor Harris, I would have higher. Mcleod Thompson, I would absolutely have higher on this list. I would probably have. That's an interesting debate, by the way. Trevor Harris, Mcleod Thompson. Who would you take today? Maybe let me know in the comment section, guys. And then Jake Maier, Nathan Rourke. Obviously, I would have those guys much higher than they currently were on my preseason rankings. So it's going to be very interesting to see. Oh, and lastly, Matthew Schiltz. I think he would be a little bit higher or a little bit more of a consideration for this top 10 of this list. But at the end of the day, I think quarterbacking in the CFL is a little bit, of a question right now. We really only have the top 2 guys, Nathan Rourke and Zach Claris, playing at a high level. And now Nathan Rourke is potentially out for the season. But Jake Maier, maybe he steps in and plays really well the rest of the way this season. I just think there's a lot of average quarterback play, mediocre quarterback play we've seen in the CFL. And, throughout the league's history, it's been carried by its great quarterback. So waiting on some of these guys to really just start to play with more consistency and win more games and, just put up more of, like I said, more consistency. I just really running out of words to describe it, but we just need more star quarterbacks at the end of the day in the CFL, and that's why I made this video. That said, that is going to be the end of today's video, ladies and gentlemen, and I want to thank each and every one of you for watching. Once again, my name is Jason. If you want to support the channel, as always, be sure to hit like and subscribe, and let me know in the comment section what you think about all of these rankings and how they would be revised at this point of the CFL season midway through, because I think a lot of things have changed, and that's why I wanted to make a video like this and talk about the state of quarterbacks in the CFL. So let me know all your thoughts down below, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.